Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Garrett Horner. In today's edition, I want to talk about the 2024 Tour de France because the Giro d'Italia just finished. We all watched Tadej Pogačar win 6 stages there, dominating the Giro and maybe not even breaking a sweat. Well, is the Tour de France already over? That's what we want to talk about up here on today's Beyond the Coverage. Not to get mixed up with Beyond the Podium like NBC, but this is Beyond the Coverage because it's the Garrett Horner Show. Okay. Now, when we're talking about Tadej Pogačar, what did he do at the Giro d'Italia? We saw him win 6 stages. I already told you that. We saw his team, UAE Team Emirates, held together. We're under pressure almost never throughout the race because Ineos rode, Bahrain Victorious rode for him. We had a little bit of other help with Cofidis rode, and of course Movistar rode one of the stages too. So UAE Team Emirates were never put under the knife. They looked solid. There's no doubt about that. They were the best team at the Giro d'Italia. It was still their B team, just like I told you guys at the beginning of the Giro, and now I'm telling you after the Giro, it's still their B team. Why was it their B team? Most important thing when you look at the Giro d'Italia and you look at Tadej Pogačar and you see his mountain super domestique, well, he only has one of them. His name was Rafał Majka. That rider was super important to Tadej Pogačar, but had he crashed at some point in time at the Giro, which we saw multiple teams, especially when you're talking about Israel Premier Tech, they finished with less than 4 guys, or 4 guys. Half their team was gone out of the race. I didn't actually check before I got on the air right now to see if one dropped on the final days, but I know they were down to 50% throughout the Giro d'Italia. So if you'd had Rafał Majka crash and say Tadej Pogačar loses Rafał Majka, changes the whole chemistry at the Giro, then of course the breakaways possibly go the distance. If we look at Tadej Pogačar's team, UAE Team Emirates, throughout the Giro, we saw, of course, on stage 1, they weren't able to bring the break all the way into the last and final climb as solid as Tadej Pogačar would have liked. He went up the last 1.5 kilometers on stage 1. Jonathan Narvaez kept on the back wheel there of Tadej Pogačar, and that kept Tadej Pogačar from having the race leader's pink jersey from stage 1 all the way to the finish of the Giro d'Italia. That's how important tactics are. If you've been in the car and you race tactics a little bit different on that stage 1, because I think Tadej Pogačar, certainly we know, has the form to have won stage 1 and dropped Jonathan Narvaez, but the way that he went into that last final 1.5 kilometers allowed Narvaez that little bit of extra help to stay there on the back wheel of Tadej Pogačar. Had we had Rafał Majka come into that last 1.5 kilometers with Bjorg, with Domin Novak, with Großschartner drilling it into that last 1.5K, instead of Rafał Majka getting attacked all over the place from 8 riders attacking him before going into the final, Tadej Pogačar could have easily had finished the Giro d'Italia in 2024 while wearing the pink jersey from stage 1 all the way to the finish. I mean, basically it's a no-hitter, right? It's a no-hitter in the playoffs. I mean, maybe it's not the biggest of the biggest race because the Tour de France is the biggest, but we all know, we're cycling fans, that the next biggest outside of the Tour de France is the Giro and the Tour of Spain. These are the holy grails. That's why they're called Grand Tours. So tactically, what I'm trying to bring up to you guys is that if UAE Team Emirates had their A team there, they would have controlled the race all the way on stage 1. They would have lit it up going in that last 1.5 kilometers. Tadej Pogačar most likely gets rid of Jonathan Narvaez. Somebody will argue with me, but I'm pretty confident saying it here publicly to the 80,000 subscribers, almost 80,000 subscribers. Thank you very much. Maybe there will be some more here, so make sure you like and subscribe. There'll be 80,000 at the end of this video. But I'm pretty confident to believe that Tadej Pogačar should have had the race leader's jersey all the way from stage 1 through the whole of the Giro d'Italia. That would have been basically a no-hitter at the Giro d'Italia. It would have been an unbelievable performance. And instead of 6 stage wins, guys, if I remind you, he'd have had 7. So, but as a whole, UAE Team Emirates, they got the job done. Rafał Majka was superb. Domin Novak went above and beyond what I expected him to do. I knew he would be good. I talked to Jani Brakovic. He's Slovenian, was my old teammate. He'd given me some inside information that Domin Novak was going to be good. And of course, we all watched Liège, Best on Liège to know why Domin Novak's form is starting to come up. We saw him good there. He performed even better at the Giro. There was no weaknesses in terms of each individual rider there at the Giro. They all performed about the way that I thought they would, but it was still their B team because they bring sprinters and because they didn't have a second rider like Rafał Majka was in terms of being that dominant going into the climbs. Now, a lot of people will say, well, Chris, that was their A team. They were the best. They were the best of the Giro. Wasn't their A team. You only have one super climber. His name's Rafał Majka. That's as simple as that. That story's put to bed. Now, when we start looking at the other stages at the Giro, and you're looking at Tadej Pogačar's performance, he's what made those 6 victories so impressive, because remember, when he wins stage 2, Ineos is pulling the whole day that day. Everything's brought back together. It's the individual time trial. Then we start going into Prata di Tivo. His team did a fabulous job. Groschartner, Bjorg, Vega Stackelhagen. They brought it in after Bjorg got back onto the front of the group. He got dropped early. He got back on the front through the valley, down the small descent as he went into Prata di Tivo. Bjorg told Tadej Pogačar, his words not mine, that we want to win this stage. So Bjorg went in there, went full gas with Vega Stackelhagen, brought it all back together. Rafael Majka controlled everything up the climb. Tadej Pogačar won easily in that sprint finish amongst the GC favorites. But when you start looking at how strong the team was later, of course, when we get into the mountain stages, it was Tadej Pogačar's performances in the later mountain stages, when we're talking 15, 16, and certainly 20, where Tadej Pogačar himself had to close the gap up to the breakaway guys. That's what makes the team A team versus a B team. You're like, Chris, they dominate. They dominated, but Tadej Pogačar was the guy that had to close the gaps. Domination, A teams bring everything back together. If I take you back to the Sky days, they're drilling it on the front. They got 5 guys on the front of the last climb. They're bringing everything back together. Chris Froome, Bradley Wiggins, Geraint Thomas, even, well, maybe not Egan Bernal. He kind of had to go out and win that race in 2019 at the Tour de France. But the other 3 guys, they had teammates that brought everything back together. Then their leaders would launch things, win, but they never had to bring somebody back like Tadej Pogačar did at the Giro. That's why it's a B team. It's undisputable. It's a B team for sure when we compare it to what's coming to the Tour de France with Tadej Pogačar. But if I can rewind it a little bit, get back on script here, Tadej Pogačar, in terms of dominating that Giro, what does it mean for the Tour de France? Is the Tour de France already gone and over with? Well, there's one of the comments, and I can't remember what day it came, but a few stages back at the Giro d'Italia, and one commenter said, hey, Chris, the differences between the best is 0.05%. And I commented back to him and I said, you're right, it is 0.05%. But the problem here at the Giro, the 2024 Giro d'Italia, is that Tadej Pogačar didn't have the other 3 guys that are that 0.05%. So that's why we saw the big gaps. When we started looking at Geraint Thomas's form, every time Tadej Pogačar attacked, what did Geraint Thomas do? I can't do it. He looked back over his shoulder, sat up, backed off the throttle, waited for help to come. Now that was intelligent racing. I'm not knocking the British rider Geraint Thomas. He was super intelligent when it comes to looking after himself. Not so intelligent, putting his team right on stage 2 for Jonathan Narvaez and then get beat up by Tadej Pogačar. So as a whole, he can't dictate his team. He can't control his team and tactically, intelligently. But for himself, Geraint Thomas, since of course his podium at the last Tour de France a couple years back when it was against Jonas Vingegaard and Tadej Pogačar, that year, if you guys were watching the Butterfly Effects and Beyond the Coverage, I told you guys Geraint Thomas has to go into that year's Tour de France. Just follow the wheels of Tadej Pogačar and Jonas Vingegaard the whole time. Do not attack unless you see a for sure weakness. He never really saw a weakness, with the exception of that stage there going up Col de Grenade. We all remember that, right? Tadej Pogačar loses the Tour de France, 2-time defending champion, loses Jonas Vingegaard while wearing the race leader's yellow jersey. Geraint Thomas sees Tadej Pogačar's hurting, goes up the road, drops Tadej Pogačar, but of course still loses the 2nd place on the podium at the Tour de France, but finishes 3rd. So Tadej Pogačar, when we're talking about having bad moments, it happens, but Geraint Thomas had to see that bad moment. He saw it, he attacked, he got some time. Of course, Tadej Pogačar dropped him later in the final week of the Tour de France in the mountain stages, got that time back on Geraint Thomas. But where I'm getting at here at the Giro d'Italia, Geraint Thomas was not as good as he was last year. So Tadej Pogačar beats Geraint Thomas. And sometimes I saw some of the comments where they said, well, Primož Roglič just barely won last year's Giro d'Italia and Geraint Thomas was 2nd. And so sometimes a lot of the comments say in there, well, the other Slovenian, Primož Roglič, just barely beat Geraint Thomas versus this year, Tadej Pogačar wiped Geraint Thomas. Well, that's true. But last year at the Giro d'Italia, Primož Roglič was not 100% until we saw him get into that penultimate stage, that individual time trial. Now his form had returned. Throughout the beginning, I believe he was sick at the beginning of the Giro d'Italia, had some crashes, some incidents happening. His form never really peaked. Now, why do I want to bring that up? Well, Jonas Vingegaard crashed at stage 4 of the Basque Country in 2024, and a lot of people think that Jonas Vingegaard shouldn't be at the Tour de France. I'll get to that story later. Let's stay on topic here at the Giro. Tadej Pogačar waxed everyone. Danny Martinez, Geraint Thomas, But Geraint Thomas wasn't on the same type of fitness that he was last year. And on top of that, Tadej Pogačar was 100%, where we saw Primož Roglič really only reach 100%. I'd probably say the day of the individual time trial, maybe the day before. But the Slovenian, the second Slovenian, Primož Roglič, wasn't at his best till late. That's why the time gap was so close. Geraint Thomas' form had dropped a little bit. You can see that easily in this 2024 season because of how many times he's looking back over his shoulder versus actually being able to stay on the wheel of the guys attacking and being able to drop all of the other company at the Giro. This year he was never able to drop the other company, really. I mean, you see Danny Martinez was better, finished second on the GC, Geraint Thomas third, but you see many times where Ben O'Connor, of course AG2R, Valentin Parapintre on the stage 20, he was marvelous, and we see Geraint Thomas always sitting back. That tells me that Geraint Thomas' form was not as high as it was last year. Not talking about night and day, but we're talking 5 watts, 10 watts here or there, and his fitness on each one of those mountain stage, to me, from sitting on the Chesterfield, always looked just a little bit less than it did last year. Tadej Pogačar is 100% on form. Now, what does it mean when you see him win by 10 minutes, Tadej Pogačar, over the rest of the competition? We don't really know. Because as I said already earlier, 0.05%, which I agree with the commenter, that when you look at the competition, the best in the world, they are that close, 1% difference. Maybe not 0.05, but 1% difference, and maybe even less when we're talking about the 4 favorites. So when you look at Tadej Pogačar's winning margin there, winning by 10 minutes, winning 6 stages, you can't take anything into this year's Tour de France from that unless, and this is very important, unless you're Tadej Pogačar or you're the trainer and the director sportifs there, maybe not the director, they might not know how to read the power meter there of Tadej Pogačar, but the trainer will know how to read Tadej Pogačar's power meter. Hopefully Tadej Pogačar understands what his power meter reads, and let's say he's going up the last climb, Monte Grappa, he's doing 410 watts average and 420 watts, whatever it may or may not have been. At that moment, he can compare his power numbers from what he's done in the past, at past year's Tour de France's, past wins this year in 2024, past multiple wins. The kid's got wins all over his resume. So he has enough victories back there against Jonas Vingegaard, against Primož Roglič, against Remco Evenepoel to know what those numbers were that he's pulling at the Giro d'Italia. But keep in mind, when he's pulling those numbers up Monte Grappa and he's dropping everyone and he's bridging the gap up there to Pellizzari, bridging in 800 meters maybe, bridges up the gap there at Pellizzari so fast and then wins the last final mountain stage of Giro d'Italia. Remember, he wasn't pushed to the limit up over 3 or 4 climbs. They weren't chasing Wout van Aert throughout the whole stages of every mountain stage and every middle stage of the Tour de France. The competition here at the Giro d'Italia wasn't as high. So even though they had the highest average speed ever recorded at the Giro d'Italia in 2024, they're not chasing Wout van Aert. There's a difference. No matter what you look at the average speed of this year's Giro d'Italia, Wout van Aert's not there. I guarantee if you go back to the 2022 Tour de France when they're chasing Wout van Aert all over the place as the Belgian wonder kid is flying up the road, throwing attacks all over and drilling the brakes, and UAE team members is pulling back there 100% on the first climb, the second climb, the third climb, and the fourth climb, well, the power meter's always going to read just a little bit less on the last mountain stage versus when you're at the Giro. Your team's not riding the front. You're not worried about attacks. You're not stressing. You got plenty of calories put in the body. You hit the Monte Grappa. Your team's dropped you off 5 kilometers to go. You got 1 Pellizzari in the front. You accelerate hard. Tadej Pogačar didn't have to use much energy at this year's Giro d'Italia because he is more than 0.5% better than the whole competition behind him. But when we get to the Tour de France, it's going to be a different story. I'm not saying the kid, Tadej Pogačar, cannot win the Tour de France. He is the #1 ranked rider on the butterfly effect. There's no doubt about it. He can do everything. Do not misunderstand what I'm saying in this video. Tadej Pogačar, the #1 ranked rider in the world. There's no doubt about it. Can he win the Tour de France? Of course he can. Can he dominate like he did at the Giro d'Italia? Absolutely not. We are getting ready for what is going to be one of the most remarkable Tour de France's in 2024 that we have ever seen in a very long time, with 4 riders all on about the same page. Now you guys were saying, well, what about Jonas Vingegaard? Jonas Vingegaard's back on his bike. Now I've seen some stuff on Beyond the Podium by NBC, not Beyond the Coverage here on Chris Horner, but Beyond the Podium, where it was TJ Van Gardner and of course his Bob Roll chatting back and forth. TJ Van Gardner was saying, well, I don't know if Jonas Vingegaard should show up at the Tour de France if he's not 100%. Of course you show up at the Tour de France. He is the 2-time Tour de France back-to-back champion. If he has anything close to 100%, he absolutely starts the Tour de France because, TJ, you never know when your form will make that jump to 100%. If Jonas Vingegaard can start the Tour de France, and I can use an experience of Wout van Aert, if I take you back to a couple years to the Tour de France, when Wout van Aert started after he had the appendix taken out, he wasn't so good. Later, he kept getting better, he kept getting better, and he kept getting better. And then, of course, he went on to win stages, and he was magnificent and won on the Champs. So Wout van Aert has proof there that you can absolutely keep getting better and better. The only thing that Jonas Vingegaard needs to remember is he's got to come in maybe just a little bit sharper, because he needs to get through the first few mountain stages that start early in the first week of the Tour de France. He has to survive those. And then if his form is somewhere at that 90-95% level, it may show up 4 days, 5 days, 1 week into the Tour de France. It might show up just a little bit after that, but it's got to show up somewhat decent by the time he gets to the first individual time trial. Otherwise, they're going to be dropping too much time to Primož Roglič, Remco Evenepoel, and of course, the #1 ranked rider in the butterfly effect, and beyond the coverage, Tadej Pogačar. So stay tuned. Don't get too worried about what you saw at the Giro. It really means nothing unless, of course, you read the power meter from Tadej Pogačar and it was something spectacular, and it has to be extremely spectacular than anything we've seen, because the Giro this year did not push Tadej Pogačar like past Tour de France's did with Jonas Vingegaard and, of course, the Visma Lease bike team drilling it all throughout every stage and pushing his team to the limit. So there's going to be excitement at the Tour de France. Do not let a lot of the hype you're reading and you're watching in other places on YouTube channels, don't let that fool you guys any. All 4 of these guys, especially the top 3, the best in the world, they will arrive at the Tour de France. They will be spectacular. And the only doubt at all right now when I'm throwing this video is going to be whether or not if Jonas Vingegaard can arrive there at the top shape that we saw it last year, especially when he won that individual time trial and put over a minute on everyone. We're talking about solid time on Wout van Aert and Tadej Pogačar. That kind of form we might not see, but he doesn't necessarily have to have that spectacular form. But 0.05% below that, that will probably still give him a shot at winning the Tour de France too. So Jonas Vingegaard, don't listen to the other guys out there. If you're coming anywhere near 90-95% form at the start of the Tour de France, you definitely start. And if you want to pull the plug throughout the first week, or if you lose time, you can always pull and then go win the Vuelta a España. Then no one's going to hold it against you. Like and subscribe, guys. I'll see you guys on the next Beyond the Coverage, brought to you by Chris Horner. Next edition coming up real soon. As we know, Dauphiné starting soon too. So like and subscribe. I'll see you guys real soon.